Bucha, Ukraine. This is an area northeast of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. And for almost a month, actually over a month, Russian soldiers had occupied this area. They had been living side by side with the people in that area all of this time. And now Ukraine claims that as Russians retreated, they decided for some reason to just kill all of these people that they had been living side by side with for over a month now. And up until now, had not wanted to kill in mass. And the story is not adding up. It just isn't adding up. And let me give you a few reasons why Ukraine's story isn't adding up. They're claiming as Russians were retreating, they did this. Spur of the moment. But Russia didn't just suddenly retreat. This is an article from March 30th. This is 6 days ago, says it right here. This is from Reuters. Russia pledges to reduce attack on Kiev, but US warns threat not over. And this was about Russia promising to scale down military operations around Kiev and another city. And then they're saying that the US warned that the threat was not over, and that's because Ukraine is not winning. Russia is winning, and Russia is shifting their attention elsewhere. Their operations around Kiev are over, and they are moving those forces that had been sitting there for over a month doing nothing, pretty much. They're shifting them elsewhere to be used. This was not a retreat. This was a premeditated withdrawal. It was announced a week ago. And then they systematically, in an organized manner, withdrew from these regions. It was not a retreat. Ukraine was not pushing Russia back anywhere around Kiev. Now, with that in mind, I want to bring up some other points about how this war has been fought. Ukraine has been caught on numerous occasions carrying out blatant war crimes. For example, New York Times video shows Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine being beaten and shot in their legs. And this is about Ukraine on camera torturing and murdering Russian soldiers. And that wasn't the only video. There were actually several videos. Ukrainian soldiers torturing and killing Russians. You're going to say, well, they're torturing and killing Russians. What makes you think that they would do this to their own population? Well, articles like this from the Washington Post. Despite this very misleading headline, Russia has killed civilians in Ukraine, Kiev's defense tactics add to the danger. They're actually admitting that Ukraine is the one getting these civilians killed because they are putting their military equipment in and among the civilian population. This professor from a university in London says, I'm very reluctant to suggest that Ukraine is responsible for civilian casualties, but to the extent that Ukraine brings the battlefield to the civilian neighborhoods, it increases the danger to civilians. And then elsewhere it says, Ukraine's strategy of placing heavy military equipment and other fortifications in civilian zones could weaken Western and Ukrainian efforts to hold Russia legally culpable for possible war crimes. And that's because it's not a war crime. It's actually a war crime that Ukraine is committing because they are using civilians as human shields. Their own people, they are using them as human shields. And the article continues. It gets even worse. They're saying Washington Post journalists have witnessed this. Ukrainian troops putting heavy equipment near apartment buildings. And then down here it says, Ukrainian military has a responsibility under international law to remove their forces and equipment from civilian populated areas. And if that is not possible, to move civilians out of those areas. If they don't do that, that is a violation of the laws of war, because what they are doing is they are putting civilians at risk because all that military equipment are legitimate targets. And this is why Russia opens up humanitarian corridors to let all of these civilians out so that the military can focus on just these fighters, just these Ukrainian soldiers. They don't want huge civilian losses. They're the ones who open these corridors. And then Ukraine claims that Russia is shooting at civilians trying to leave. Why would they do that? They also open these humanitarian corridors to get fighters who are not interested in fighting anymore to come through. Because why corner 1,000 fighters if you could convince 500 of them to leave while the other 500 are committed and are going to remain. Why fight 1,000 cornered men when you could fight 500 instead? So there's absolutely no logic for Russia to open a humanitarian corridor and then stop everyone from getting out. It makes absolutely no sense. But from Ukraine's perspective, it makes perfect sense, because it means civilian casualties, and it means getting the world on their side, because they know that the Western media will help them blame all of this on Russia. And even though that is what they've been doing, you find articles like this Washington Post article admitting that. Now, what else has Ukraine been doing to their own population? This is from news.com.au from Australia. Ukrainian civilians stripped, tied up, and beaten by vigilantes in shocking videos. Horrifying videos show Ukrainian civilians, including women and children, being tied up, stripped, and beaten in apparent vigilante attacks. And if if you're looking at this conflict, if you're following it on social media, you will find dozens of these pictures and videos every day, every single day, in every single city in Ukraine. This is what's going on. And it's not just locals doing this. There are paramilitary groups. There's also police. There's people in uniforms participating in this. Just go online and look at it. And this is what Ukraine is doing to their own population. This is what they're doing to people they think are not sufficiently enthusiastic enough about fighting against the Russians, or aren't doing their part in resisting the Russians. This is what they do to their own people. So with all of this in mind, Ukraine torturing and killing Russian prisoners of war, a blatant war crime. Ukraine putting their heavy military equipment in and amongst the civilian population, knowing it's going to get civilians killed. Again, another blatant war crime. Ukrainian security forces tying up, torturing, and humiliating their own people in vigilante attacks in every city across the country. This is what Ukraine does. This is what they're doing openly in front of the entire world. Even the Western media has taken note. When Russian forces left Bucha, and these people, these Ukrainian soldiers with this mindset, went into those areas and saw Ukrainian people who had lived side by side with the Russians for over a month and did not do their part to sufficiently fight and expel the Russians, what do you think they did to them? Yes, they killed them. They tortured them. They raped them. They killed them. And Zelensky knows that when Ukrainian forces go back into these areas, they're going to do this as well. And it'll get worse. It'll just get worse. Anywhere Russia moves out, this is what they will do. This is why Eastern Ukraine has been fighting an 8-year war against Kiev, the regime in Kiev and its security apparatus, because this is what they were doing in Eastern Ukraine. This is why they built up an army and have been resisting all of this time. This is one of the reasons Russia intervened in Ukraine in the first place. It's interesting that Russia is the one who went to the UN Security Council to discuss Bucha provocations. They want it investigated. They want a discussion started. And guess who prevented this from happening? The United Kingdom. You have President Zelensky. He visits Bucha. He denounces killings as genocide. In this article right here from Guardian, Russia now synonymous with Bucha killing, says Zelensky. Isn't it convenient how they're leaping to these conclusions and really driving this point home, while the West, the US, the UK, France, others, they're all trying to obstruct a real actual investigation to get to the bottom of this. This is exactly what they did in Syria over and over and over again. They had these so-called freedom fighters who were actually terrorists carrying out the worst possible crimes against humanity, and the Western media would help them blame it on the Syrian government, and they would rush everything through before the evidence actually came to the surface. Why would Russia kill all of these people after living side by side with them for a month? Why wouldn't they have killed them immediately and covered it all up by now? Why would they have withdrew in an orderly fashion and just as they were leaving, kill all of these people to incriminate themselves and to paint themselves as war criminals on the international stage? Why would they do that? Versus why would Ukraine, who has been caught in serial war crimes, even by the West's own admission, why would they go in there and kill these people who they would almost certainly see as collaborators? I want to wait until actual evidence comes out. I want to wait for an investigation. I want time. I want time before rushing to judgment. I'm simply saying that looking at the pattern of Ukraine's behavior versus what Russia has been doing is almost inconceivable that Russia would have done this. There's no reason for them to have done this. And even though for Ukraine this sort of behavior is self-defeating, this is what they have been doing all along. I mean, having Nazis in your army is self-defeating. Having them in your army for 8 years and not expelling them and not changing their flags and purging all of these Nazi flags and insignias and mottos, not purging that is self-defeating. This is what Ukraine has been doing for years. And this is what they've been doing since this conflict began over a month ago, at the end of February. So it is not looking good for Ukraine, but the West is going to push this through, just like they've done over and over again in Syria before this, in Libya before that, in Iraq and Afghanistan before that. So just keep all of that in mind. Ukraine torturing and killing Russian POWs, torturing their own people for not sufficiently resisting or doing their part during this conflict. And the Washington Post and Human Rights Watch admitting that they're putting their heavy equipment in and among the civilian population to get civilians killed. This is what Ukraine is doing. Who do you think went into Bucha and killed those people? So in the video description below, there will be all of these links. Notice I didn't cite a single source from Russia. This is all Western media admitting how Ukraine is fighting this war and what type of resistance Ukraine is putting up and what they're doing to their own people in this process. You can use your brain and put the pieces of this puzzle together and figure out what probably, most likely, almost 90% sure what happened in Bucha. And then also ask yourself, why isn't the West investigating this? If they actually think Russia did this, why not get the evidence and have a slam dunk on Russia? Why are they rushing to judgment? Because they know that evidence is going to come out and it's not going to be Russia. That's why they're doing it. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing. Look in the video description below for other places you can find my work in case I'm deleted off of YouTube. I'm also on Odyssey and Rumble. I'm also almost on a daily basis and sometimes multiple times a day updating my Telegram account. So please, if you're not on Telegram, get on Telegram and follow me on Telegram. There's many, many others on Telegram who have been chased off of Twitter and Facebook precisely because they don't want people pointing these things out at times like this. Also in the video description below are ways you can help support my work. You can do one-time donations through Buy Me a Coffee. You could do membership, monthly membership through Buy Me a Coffee and also through Patreon. And I also have PayPal for the time being. You can do one-time donations that way. And to everyone who has been contributing, thank you so much. And as always, thank you for watching.